Hey, it looks if you did not invest in crypto, you were making a smart move and not moving. Wow, we got a lot to talk about here. Crypto has dived big time. It's incredible what's happened. We'll get into that and more. Hi, everybody. Craig Peterson here. Appreciate you joining me today. Spend a little bit of time with me. It's always a fun thing to do. Thanks for coming and thanks for sticking around. Cryptocurrencies. It's a term for all kinds of these basically non-government sanctioned currencies. And the idea behind it was I should be able to trade with you and you should be able to trade with me. We should be able to verify the transactions, and it's nobody's business as to what's happening behind the scenes. And yet, in reality, it's everybody's business because all of those transactions are recorded in a very public way. So crypto in this case does not mean secret or cryptography. It's actually referring to the way the ledgers work and your wallets and, in fact, the actual coins themselves. A lot of people have bought them. I was talking with my friend Matt earlier this week, and Matt was saying, hey, listen, I made a lot of money off of crypto. He's basically a day trader. He watches it. Is it going up? Is it going down? Which coin is doge coin the way to go? Because Elon Musk just mentioned it. Is it something else? What should I do? And he buys and sells and's made money off of it. However, a lot of people have bought and held onto various cryptocurrencies. Of course, the most popular one, the one everybody knows about, is Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is pretty good stuff, bottom line. But 40% right now of Bitcoin investors are underwater. Isn't that incredible? Because of the major drop-off from the November peak. And this was all started by a problem that was over at something called Terra Luna, which is another cryptocurrency. Now, already that there is a ton of a ton of changes in price in various cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin being, of course, a real big one where we've seen $5,000, $10,000 per Bitcoin drops. It really is an amazingly fluid, if you will, coin. So there's a number of different people that have come out with some plans. Well, how about if we do like what the US dollar used to do, which is it's tied to a specific amount of gold or tied to a specific amount of silver. Of course, it's been a while since that was the case. President Nixon is the one that got us off of those standards. Having gold, for instance, back in your currency means that there is going to be far less fluctuation. And your currency means something. See, the whole idea behind currency markets for a government is, yeah, you do print money and you do continue to increase the amount of money you print every year, because what you're trying to do is create money for the new goods, products, services that are created as well. So if we create another $1 million worth of services in the economy, there should be another $1 million in circulation. That's the basic theory, monetary theory, really boiling it right down. Now, of course, already our government has printed way more than it maybe should have. It is certainly causing inflation. There's no doubt about that one. So they're looking at these various cryptocurrencies and say, what can we do? How can we have a gold standard where the US dollar was the currency the world used and its value was known? Having a stable currency is incredibly important for consumers and businesses. A business needs to know, hey, listen, like we sign a 3-year contract with our vendors and with our customers, and so we need a stable price so we know what's our cost going to be, what can we charge our customer here, can the customer bear the price increases, etc. The answer to most of those questions, of course, is no. They really can't, particularly in this day and age. So having a fixed currency. We know how much it's worth. I know in 2 years from now, I'm not going to be completely upside down with this customer because I'm having to eat some major increases in prices. And as a consumer, you want to look at it and say, wow, I've got a variable rate interest rate on my mortgage. And man, I remember friends of mine back in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s, who just got nailed by this. But they had variable rate interest loan on their home because that's all they could get. That's all they could afford. So the variable rate just kept going up. It was higher than credit cards are nowadays. I remember a friend of mine complaining they had 25% interest, and that's when they lost the house. Because 25% interest means if you have a $100,000 loan, you got $25,000 in interest that year, let alone principal payments. So it was a really bad thing. It was really hard for people to deal with. And I can understand that. So the cryptocurrency guys said, okay, let's tie it to something else. So the value has a value. And part of what they were trying to tie it to is the US dollar. That's some currencies decided to do that. And there were others that tried to tie it to actual assets. So it wasn't just tied to the dollar. It was, okay, we have X dollars in this bank account. And that's what's backing the value of our currency, which is quite amazing to think about that. Some of them are backed by gold or other precious metals. Nowadays, that includes a lot of different metals. This one coin called Terra Luna dropped almost 100% last week. Isn't that amazing? And it had a sister token called Terra USD, which Terra Luna was tied to. Now, this is all called stablecoin. The idea is the prices will be stable. And in the case of Terra and Terra USD, the stability was provided by a computer program. So there's nothing really behind it other than it can be backed by the community currencies themselves. So that's something like Intercoin, for instance. This is another one of the, there are hundreds of them out there, of these cryptocurrencies. But the community backs it, so the goods and services that you can get in some of these communities is what gives value to Intercoin money system. Now, that makes sense too, right? Because the dollar is only worth something to you if it's worth something to someone else. If you were the only person in the world that had US dollars, who would want? Obviously, the economy is working without US dollars, so why would they try and trade with you if you had something called a US dollar that nobody else had, or you came up with something, you made something up out of thin air and said, okay, this is now worth this much, or it's backed by that, etc. Because if you can't spend it, it's not worth anything. Anyhow, this is a very big deal because on top of these various cryptocurrencies losing incredible amounts of money over the last couple of weeks, we have another problem with cryptocurrencies. If you own cryptocurrencies, you have what's called a wallet, and that wallet has a transaction number that's used for you to track, and others to track the money that you have in the cryptocurrencies. And it's a pretty good little function or feature. It's hard for a lot of people to do. So they have these kind of crypto banks. So if you have one of these currencies, you can just have your currency on deposit at this bank. Because there's a whole bunch of reasons, but one of the reasons is if there is a run on a bank or if there's a run on a cryptocurrency, currencies have built into them incredibly expensive penalties if you try and liquidate that cryptocurrency quickly, and also if there are a lot of people trying to liquidate it. So you had a double whammy, and people were paying more than 3 Bitcoin in order to sell Bitcoin. And so think about that. Think about how much a Bitcoin's worth, which is tens of thousands of dollars. So it's overall, this is a problem. It's been a very big problem. So people put it into a bank. So Coinbase is one of the big ones. Coinbase had its first quarter earnings report out. Now, this is the U.S.'s largest cryptocurrency exchange, and they had a quarterly loss for the first quarter of 2022 of $430 million. That's their loss. And they had an almost 20% drop in monthly users of Coinbase. So that's something, right? And they put it in their statement, their quarterly statement here as to what's up. Here's the real scary part. Coinbase said in its earnings report last Tuesday that it holds $256 billion in both fiat currencies and cryptocurrencies on behalf of its customers. So fiat currencies are things like the Federal Reserve notes, our U.S. dollar, okay? $250 billion that it's holding for other people. Think of it like a bank. However, they said in the event that Coinbase, we ever declare bankruptcy, quote, the crypto assets we hold in custody on behalf of our customers could be subject to bankruptcy proceedings. Coinbase users would become general unsecured creditors, meaning they have no right to claim any specific property from the exchange in proceedings. People's funds would become inaccessible. Very big deal, very scary for a very good reason. Hey, when we come back, websites, you type stuff in, email address. Do you know you don't even have to hit submit in most cases? They're stealing it. I'm sure you've heard of JavaScript in your browser. This is a programming language that actually runs programs right there in your web browser, whether you like it or not. And we just had a study on this. 100,000 websites are collecting your information up front. Hi, I'm Craig Peterson, your Chief Information Security Officer. This is not a surprising thing to me. I have, in my web browser, I have JavaScript turned off for most websites that I go to. Now, JavaScript is a programming language, and it lets them do some pretty cool things on a web page. In fact, that's the whole idea behind Java. Just like cookies on a web browser, where they have a great use, which is to help keep track of what you're doing on the website, where you're going, pulling up other information that you care about, right? Part of your navigation can be done with cookies. They go on in their usefulness, but part of the problem is that people are using them to track you online. So, like Facebook and many others will go ahead and have their cookies on other websites so they know where you're going, what you're doing, even when you're not on Facebook. That's, by the way, part of what the Firefox browser has been trying to overcome here. They have a special fenced-in mode that happens automatically when you're using Firefox on Facebook. Pretty good, pretty cool. The Apple iOS devices use a different mechanism. And in fact, they're already saying that Facebook and some of these others who sell advertisers information about you have really had some major losses in revenue because Apple is blocking their access to certain information about you. Back to JavaScript. It's a programming language that they can use to do almost anything on your web browser. Bad guys have figured out that if they can get you to go to a website, or if they can insert an ad onto a page that you're visiting, they can then use your web browser, because it's basically just a computer, to do what? Well, to mine Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. So you're paying for the electricity for them as your computer is sitting there crunching on these algorithms that they need to use to figure out how to find the next Bitcoin or whatever it might be, and you are only noticing that your device is slowing down. For instance, our friends over on the Android platform have found before that sometimes their phones are getting extremely hot even when they're not using them. And we found that, many times that's just a Bitcoin miner who has taken over partial control of your phone, just enough to mine Bitcoin. And they did that through your web browser and JavaScript. So you can now see some of the reasons that I go ahead and disable JavaScript on most websites I go to. Now, some websites aren't going to work. I want to warn you up front. If you go into your browser settings and turn off JavaScript, you are going to break a number of websites. In fact, many websites that are out there. So you got to figure out which sites you want it on, which sites don't you want it on. But there's another problem that we have found just this week, and it is based on a study that was done. It's reported in Ars Technica, but they found 100,000 top websites. 100,000 top websites. These include signing up for a newsletter, making hotel reservation, checking out online. You probably take for granted that nothing happens until you hit submit, right? That used to be the case in Web 1.0 days. It isn't anymore. Now, I want to point out, I have thousands of people who are on my email list. So every week they get my insider show notes. So these are the top articles of the week. They are usually 6 to 10 articles, usually 8 of them, that are talking about cybersecurity, things of importance. In fact, the whole radio show and podcast are based on those insider show notes that I also share with the hosts of all of the different radio shows and television shows that I appear on. It's pretty cool. So they get that. But I do not use this type of technology. Yeah, there's some JavaScript that'll make a little sign-up thing come up at the top of the screen. But I am not using technology that is in your face or doing what these people are doing, all right? So you start filling out a form, you haven't hit submit, and have you noticed all of a sudden you're getting emails from? It's happened to me before. Your assumption about hitting submit isn't always the case. Some researchers from Leuven University of Lausanne crawled and analyzed the top 100,000 websites. So crawling means they have a little robot that goes to visit the web page, downloads all of the code that's on the page, and then they analyzed it. So what they found was that a user visiting a site, if the user is in the European Union, is treated differently than someone who visits the site from the United States. Now, there's a good reason for this. We've helped companies with complying with the GDPR, which are these protection rules that are in place in the European Union. And that's why you're seeing so many websites, mine included, that say, hey, listen, we do collect some information on you. You can click here to find out more. And some websites let you say, no, I don't want you to have any information about me. We collect information just so that you can navigate the site properly, okay? Very basic. But that's why European Union users are treated differently than those coming from the United States. So this new research found that over 1,800 websites gathered an EU user's email address without their consent. So it's almost 2,000 websites out of the top 100,000 if you're in the EU. And they found that about, 3,000 websites logged a U.S. user's email in some form. Now, that's before you hit submit. So you start typing in your email, you type in your name, and you don't hit submit. Many of the sites are apparently grabbing that information, putting it into their database, and maybe even started using it before you gave them explicit permission to do so. Isn't that fascinating? And the 1,800 sites that gathered information on European Union users without their consent are breaking the law. That's why so many U.S. companies decided they had to comply with the GDPR, because it's a real big problem. So these guys also crawled websites for password leaks in May 2021, and they found 52 websites where third parties, including Yandex. Yandex is a big Russian search engine and more, were collecting password data before submission. So since then, the group went ahead and let the websites know what was happening, what they found. Because it's not necessarily intentional by the website itself. It might be a third party piece of software that's doing it. But they informed those sites, hey, listen, you're collecting user data before there's been explicit consent to collect it. In other words, before you hit the submit button. And they thought, wow, this is very surprising. They thought they might find a few hundred websites. But in the course of a year now, they found that there were over 3,000 websites, really, that were doing this stuff. So they presented their findings at Usenet. Oh, actually, they haven't presented them yet because it's going to be at Usenet in August. And these are what they call leaky forums. So yet another reason to turn off JavaScript when you can. But I also got to add, a lot of the forums do not work if JavaScript's not enabled. So we got to do something about it. Maybe complain. Make sure they aren't collecting your data. Maybe I should do a little course on that one so you can figure out, are they doing it before I even give them permission? Anyhow, this is Craig Peterson. Visit me online, craigpeterson.com, and sign up for that no obligation insider show notes. We are shipping all kinds of military equipment over to Ukraine, and right now they're talking about another $30 billion worth of equipment being shipped to what was the world's number one arms dealer, Ukraine. I'm looking right now at an article that was in the Washington Post, and some of their stuff is good, some of their stuff is bad. I guess like pretty much any media outlet. But they're raising some really good points here. One of them is that we are shipping some pretty advanced equipment and some not so advanced equipment to Ukraine to help them fight in this war to protect themselves from Russia. Now, all of that's pretty common. Ultimately, looking back in history, there have been a lot of people who've made a lot of money off of wars. Many of the big banks financing both sides of wars going way, way back and coming all the way up through the 20th century. And part of the way people make money in wartime is obviously making the equipment and supplies and stuff that the armies need. The other way that they do it is by trading in arms. So not just the supplies, but the bullets all the way through the advanced missile systems. Now, there's been some concerns because of what we have been seeing online. We've talked about Telegram here before. Not the safest web app to use in order to keep in touch. It's really an app for your phone. And it's being used by Ukraine to really coordinate some of their hacker activities against Russia. They've also been using it in Russia, Telegram that is, in order to communicate with each other. Ukraine has posted pictures of some of the killed soldiers from Russia, and people have been reaching out to their mothers in Russia. They've done a lot of stuff with Telegram. It's interesting. And hopefully, eventually, we'll find out what the real truth is, right? Because all sides in the military use a lot of propaganda, right? The first casualty in war is the truth. It always has been. So we're selling to a country, Ukraine, that has made a lot of money off of selling weapon systems, being an intermediary. So you're not buying the system from Russia. No, you're buying it from Ukraine, and it has been, of course, just as deadly. But now we are sending equipment, military-grade equipment, to Ukraine. We could talk about just that a lot. I mentioned the whole Lend-Lease program many months ago. Now it seems to be in the news. Now it takes a while for the mainstream media to catch up with us. I'm usually about 6 to 12 weeks ahead of what they're talking about. And so when we're talking about Lend-Lease, it means We're not giving it to them. We're not selling it to them. We're just lending them the equipment or perhaps leasing it, just like we did for the United Kingdom back in World War II. Not a bad idea if you want to get weapons into the hands of an adversary, and not really, or not an adversary, but an ally or potential ally against an adversary that you have and they have. But part of the problem is we're talking about Ukraine here. Ukraine was not invited into NATO because it was so corrupt. You might remember they elected a new president over there. That president started investigating, hired a prosecutor to go after the corruption in Ukraine. And then you heard President Joe Biden, vice president at the time, bragging about how he got this guy shut down. Yeah, he got the prosecutor shut down. The prosecutor that had his sights on, of course, Hunter Biden, as well as other people. So it's a real problem. But let's set that aside for now. We're talking about Ukraine and the weapon systems we've been sending over there. There have been rumors out there. I haven't seen hard evidence, but I have seen things in various papers worldwide talking about Telegram, saying that the Ukrainians have somehow gotten their hands on these weapons and are selling them on Telegram. Imagine that. Effectively kind of a dark web thing. So we're saying the Biden administration, that none of this is going to happen. Why? Because we went ahead and we put into the contracts that they could not sell or share or give any of this equipment away without the explicit permission of the United States government. Okay, that kind of sounds like it's not a bad idea. I would certainly put it into any contract like this, no question. But what could happen here if this equipment falls into the hands of our adversaries or other Western countries, NATO countries? How do you keep track of them? It's very hard to do. How do you know who's actually using them? Very hard to do. So enforcing these types of contracts is very difficult, which makes the contract pretty weak, frankly. And then let's look at Washington, D.C. The United States, according to the Washington Post, in mid-April, gave Ukraine a fleet of Mi-17 helicopters. Now, these Mi-17 helicopters are Russian, originally Soviet designs, and they were bought by the United States about 10 years ago. We bought them for Afghan's government, which of course now has been deposed, but we still have our hands on some of these helicopters. And when we bought them from Russia, we signed a contract. The United States signed a contract promising not to transfer the helicopters to any third country, quote, without the approval of the Russian Federation. Now, that's according to a copy of the certificate that's posted on the website of Russia's Federal Service on Military Technical Cooperation. Russia's come out and said that our transfer of those helicopters has grossly violated the foundations of international law. And you know what? It has, right? Arms experts are saying that Russia's aggression in Ukraine more than justifies U.S. support, but the violations of the weapons contracts, man, that really hurts our credibility. And we're not honoring these contracts. How can we expect Ukraine to honor those contracts? That's where the problem really comes in. And it's ultimately a very big problem. So this emergency spending bill, the $30 billion, makes Ukraine the world's single largest recipient of U.S. security assistance ever. They've received more in 2022 than the United States ever provided to Afghanistan, Iraq, or Israel in a single year. So they're adding to the stockpiles of weapons that we've already committed. We've got 1,400 Stinger anti-aircraft systems, 5,500 anti-tank missiles, 700 Switchblade drones, 90 long-range howitzers, that's artillery, 7,000 small arms, 50 million rounds of ammunition, and other mines, explosives, and laser-guided rocket systems, according to the Washington Post. So it's fascinating to look at. It's a real problem. And now that we've got the bad guys who are using the dark web, remember the dark web system that we set up, the Onion Network. Yeah, that one. They can take these, they can sell them, they can move them around. It is a real problem, a very big problem. What are we going to do when all of those weapon systems come back aimed at us this time? It's one thing to leave billions of dollars worth of helicopters, etc., back in Afghanistan, as the Biden administration did with their crazy withdrawal tactic. But at least those will wear out. The bullets, missile systems, howitzers? Different deal. It seems like the government calls war on everything. The war against drugs, the war against poverty. Now we are looking at a war against end-to-end encryption by governments worldwide, including our own. The European Union is following in America's footsteps again, only a few years behind this time. But it's not a good thing in this case. You might remember, if you have been following cybersecurity like I have, back in the Clinton administration, there was a very heavy push for something called the Clipper chip. And I think that whole Clipper chip thing actually started with the Bush administration. And it was a bad thing, because what they were trying to do is force all businesses to use this encryption chipset that was developed and promoted by the National Security Agency. And it was supposed to be an encryption device that is used to secure voice and data messages. And it had a built-in back door that allowed federal, state, local law enforcement, anybody that had the key, the ability to decode any intercepted voice or data transmissions. It was introduced in 93 and was, thank goodness, defunct by 1996. So it used something called skipjack. Man, I remember that a lot. And it used it to transfer Diffie-Hellman key exchange. I've worked with that before. Crypto keys. It used the DES algorithm, the data encryption standard, which is still used today. And the Clinton administration argued that the Clipper chip was absolutely essential for law enforcement to keep up with the constantly progressing technology in the United States. And a lot of people believe that using this would act as, frankly, an additional way for terrorists to receive information and to break into encrypted information. And the Clinton administration argued that it would increase national security because terrorists would have to use it to communicate with outsiders, banks, suppliers, contacts, and the government could listen in on those calls. Aren't we supposed to, in the United States, have a right to be secure in our papers and other things, right? The federal government has no right to come into any of that stuff unless they get a court order, right? So they were saying we would take this key, we'll make sure that it's in a lockbox, just like Al Gore's Social Security money, and no one would be able to get their hands on it except anyone that wanted to, unless there was a court order. And you know how this stuff goes. It just continues to progress and get a lot worse. There was a lot of backlash by it. The Electronic Privacy Information Center, Electronic Frontier Foundation, both pushed back, saying that it would not only have the effect of this is a quote, not only subjecting citizens to increased and possibly illegal government surveillance, but that the strength of the Clipper chip's encryption could not be evaluated by the public as its design was classified secret, and that therefore individuals and businesses might be hobbled with an insecure communication system, which is absolutely true. And the NSA went on to do some things like pollute random number generators and other things to make it so that it was almost impossible to have end-to-end encrypted data. So we were able to kill that many years ago now, about 30 years ago, when they introduced this thing. It took a few years to get rid of it. But now the EU is out there saying they want to stop end-to-end encryption. The United States has already said that. The new director of Homeland Security has, and as well as Trump's, again, Homeland Security people said, we need to be able to break the encryption. And we've talked about some of the stories, real-world stories of things that have happened because of the encryption. So the EU has now got a proposal forward that would force tech companies to scan private messages for child sexual abuse material called CSAM and evidence of grooming, even when those messages are supposed to be protected by end-to-end encryption. So we know how this goes, right? It starts at something that everybody can agree on, right? There's child sexual abuse material, abductions of children. There's still a lot of slavery going on in the world. All of that stuff needs to be stopped. And so we say, yeah, okay, that makes a whole lot of sense. But where does it end up? Online services that receive detection orders, this is from Ars Technica, under the pending European Union legislation would have obligations concerning the detection, the reporting, the removal, and blocking of known and new child sexual abuse material, as well as solicitation of children. So what we're starting to see here in the U.S. is some apps, some companies that make smartphones, for instance, looking at pictures that are sent and shared to see if it looks like it might be pornographic in some way. Because, again, we're seeing younger kids who are sending pictures of each other naked or body parts naked to others. If you can believe that, absolutely incredible. But what happens when you send them using an end-to-end encrypted app? Now, my advice for people who want to keep information private, you're a business person, you're working on a deal, you don't go to Twitter like Elon Musk and put it out there for the world to see. Although I'm sure he's got some ulterior motives in doing that. You use an app called Signal. That's certainly the best one that's out there right now. It provides a whole lot of encryption and privacy, and even has some stuff built in to break the software that's often used to break into the end-to-end encryption systems. So they're trying to get this in place here. They're calling it an important security tool, but it's ordering companies to break that end-to-end encryption by whatever technological means necessary. It's going to be hard because frankly, it's going to be impossible for them to enforce this because you can take encrypted data and make it look like almost anything. And man, has that happened for a long time. Think of the microdots way back when, certainly in World War II and on, they were very popular. There's techniques to encrypt data and embed it in a photograph and make it almost impossible to detect. So again, they're not going to get to do what they're hoping to do. And I think that's an important thing for everybody to pay close attention to. So they do want to get rid of end-to-end. There's WhatsApp out there, which I don't really trust because it's owned by Facebook, but that's supposedly end-to-end. There's end-to-end encryption on Apple iMessage, although apparently there are some ways to get into that. I think Apple is now maintaining a secondary key that they can use to decrypt. But the backdoors that the U.S. has called for and other people have called for have been pushed back by companies like Apple CEO Tim Cook opposed government-mandated backdoors. Of course, Apple got a major backlash from security experts when it unveiled a plan to have iPhones and other devices scan user photos for child sexual abuse images. That's what I was referring to earlier. And Apple put that plan on hold and promised to make changes. But this is Apple all over again, and it's hard to say what's the least privacy intrusive way, because if the ISP can read them all, if the company that's providing you with the app that you're using to send the message can read them all, how much privacy is there? And if they can read it, who else can read it? And what can be done with it? Blackmail has happened many times in the past because someone got their hands on something. So what happens when a congressman or the military or someone in the military uses? That's another problem Because if we don't know the way the encryption is being used or is made, just like was true with the Clipper chip, and then we move on to the next step, which is, okay, so what do we do now with this data that we're storing? Are they going to keep that data confidential? Can they keep it out of the hands of the criminals? We certainly found that they just haven't been able to. And if you're talking about grooming, which is what the European Union wants, in other words, someone that's trying to get a child to the point where they're doing something that would be abhorrent, you've got to look at all of the messages. You have to have them analyzed by some sort of an AI, artificial intelligence, and then ultimately analyzed by people. It's just going to get worse and worse. This is the most sophisticated mass surveillance machinery that has ever been deployed outside of China in the USSR. It's absolutely incredible when you look at it from a cryptographic standpoint. And again, we understand protecting the children. We all want to do that, but how far will this end up going? I also want to point out that my new insider show notes that I've been sending out over the last few weeks have had some amazing responses from people. I've had people saying that this is what they look for in their mailbox. It's the first piece of email they read, that it's the most relevant news that they get. But you can only get it one way, and that's by going to craigpeterson.com. You can sign up there. It's easy enough to do. There's no obligation on your part, right? This is not my paid newsletter. This is absolutely free, and it's incredibly valuable. Plus, I'll also be sending you once a week-ish a small training. It takes you a few minutes to read. I just last week went through the firewall in your Windows machine, the firewall in your Mac, and gave you step-by-step instructions. Is it turned on? What is it doing? What should it do? How do you turn it on, and how do you use it? So you can only get that one way, and that's if you are on my email list. So it's important to be there, and if you have any questions, you can hit reply to any of those emails, whether it's the training or if it's the insider show notes. Just hit reply and I'll go ahead and answer your question. You might have to wait a few days because I can get pretty busy sometimes, but always answer. So me at craigpeterson.com. Anybody can send me email, and you can also text me at 617-500-3221. 617-500-3221 with any questions. That's it for right now. There is so much more. Make sure you sign up right now. And of course, there's more coming right up. So stick around. Jam-packed today. We're going to start with non-fungible tokens. If you don't know what those are, this is a very big deal because so many people are investing in them right now. Are they really investments? I've got a bit of a blowback here. Most people think that Bitcoin is anonymous. We're going to talk about how it absolutely is not. We're going to talk about anonymous. In fact, the Russians, Microsoft, what they're doing against the Russians, and this little comedic thing about cars. NFTs are very big deal. I'm going to pull up here on my screen right now. This is a picture of Mr. Jack Dorsey. We'll go full screen. An article from a website called CoinDesk. CoinDesk is one of these sites that really tries to track what's happening out there in the Bitcoin community. Of course, nowadays it's much more than Bitcoin, isn't it? We're talking about all kinds of different currencies that have a blockchain backend. They're called cryptocurrencies, basically. But the big one was, of course, Bitcoin. And there is a whole concept now when we're talking about things like cryptocurrencies and these non-fungible tokens. People have been investing in them like crazy. People are making millions of dollars every week. Now, remember, I am not an investment advisor, and particularly I'm not your investment advisor. So take all of this to your investment advisor. I'm not telling you to buy them. I am telling you to be cautious here, though. because these non-fungible tokens are designed to give you the ability to be able to just own something in the digital world. What might you own in the digital world? We've had a lot of different stuff. We've seen some just crazy monkey things. Have you seen those? These little pictures of monkeys. They're graphic designed and it's all animated, if you will. It's like cartoons. And people pay money for them. One of the things that people paid money for was the rights to the first tweet ever on Twitter. So that's what you're getting when we're talking about an NFT, a non-fungible transaction. It is now yours. So this particular NFT we're talking about was of our friend here, Jack Dorsey. We'll pull it up again, this article. And he had a tweet that was sold last year for $48 million. That is a lot of money. So people look at this as an investment, but it's not the same as hanging art on the wall. You've got a Picasso, that has some intrinsic value. It's a painting. It has oil paints on it. It was designed by and painted by a crazy man years ago. And you can take that Picasso and you can turn it around and sell it. It has some real value. If you own the rights to something, let's say it's one of these monkey pictures. It reminds me of a postage stamp. And you paid real money for it. Some of these things are going, as I said, for over $1 million. And this Jack Dorsey first tweet went for $48 million. So let's say that's what you did, right? You bought this thing for $48 million. What do you have? Really, what do you have? Because anybody can go online and look at that tweet. Anybody can print it up and stick it on a wall. Anybody can go out and get that picture of the monkeys, right? The guy drew. And you can look at it. In fact, I could pull it up right now if you wanted to see it. But people paid real money for that. So they've got what? Really, what do they have? You can't take it off the wall like your Picasso and sell it, right? Or Banksy if you're into the more modern art. It's just not what is doable. How do you make this work? Owning the NFT only gives you bragging rights. In reality, that's what it does. You have bragging rights. Because you could take that digital picture and make 100 quadrillion copies of it. Yeah, you'd still own the NFT. You would still have in the blockchain for whatever NFT company you're using the rights to it. It would say that you owned it. So let's talk about the blockchain behind it. There are a lot of companies that are trying to give you that blockchain. Okay, all right, I get it. Yeah, I get to own it. But who's running the blockchain behind it? Who's validating that you own it? With Bitcoin and many of these other blockchain currencies that are out there, there are various companies and individuals who are registered, who have all of the paperwork, if you will, saying who owns how much of what and who paid who and everything. And that, by the way, is why it takes so long for some of these Bitcoin and other transactions to occur. But how about the NFT? There are tons of companies out there that say they will certify the NFT. So it gets to be a real problem. And when we get into this Jack Dorsey tweet and this article about it, which let me pull it up again here for you guys. This guy, Sina Estavi, bought the very first tweet ever from Twitter founder Jack Dorsey for $2.9 million last year. And he decided that he wanted to sell it. So he listed it for sale, again at $48 million last week. He put it up for open bid. And this article on CoinDesk is talking about that. And you can see that if you're watching me on Rumble or YouTube. I'm showing you my screen here right now. But this Iranian-born crypto entrepreneur named Sina Estavi purchased it for $2.9 million in March 2021. Last Thursday, he announced on Twitter, where else, that he wanted to sell this NFT. And he said, hey, listen, I'm going to put 50% of the proceeds to charity. Well, the auction closed. This was an open auction. People could go and bid on it. And that auction closed with an offer of basically $277 at current prices when this article was written. $277. And the lowest bid was $6. And as I recall, this is not in this article, but there were only a handful of bids. Like, when I say a handful, I mean like a half a dozen bids. It's crazy. This is a real problem because the deadline is over. He paid how much for it, right? How much did he pay? Pull that up again, $2.9 million last year. And his highest bid was in the neighborhood of $280. Isn't that crazy? So did he get money on this? Did he win money on this? I don't know. I'm looking at this saying, is it worth it to buy something like that? That you might think, oh, the very first Apple computer, an Apple One. Well, that's going to be worth some serious money. Yeah, it is. It's something you can grab onto. You can hold on to it. It's something. And you can sell it. You can trade it. You can take a picture of it. You can't make digital copies of it. It's a physical thing that's worth something. Same thing with that Picasso on the wall. It's really worth something. It has some basic intrinsic value. Jack's tweet, the very first tweet, how much is that thing worth? It basically nothing. So the tweet is showing here, I'll pull it up on the screen again, that he's selling at Jack 2006-03-21 at 8:50:14 p.m. Just setting up my Twitter. So there you go. There's Jack, his very first tweet. And it's absolutely amazing, right? Is it worth it? Let me pull up some other stuff here for you guys. I'm going to pull this up. Here is Coinbase launching an NFT marketplace in hopes of appealing to crypto and mainstream users. So here's some examples of NFTs. I'm going to zoom in on this for those of you guys watching on Rumble or on Twitter. Actually, you can see it on Twitter too, but YouTube. Here you go. Here's some NFTs. It's artwork and it's a creature. So you can buy creature number 7806 right now for 6 ETH. So let me see. Value of 6 Ethereum is what? Ethereum to US dollars. So for $3,084 as of right now, you can get a crappy picture that even I could have drawn, okay, of this guy. And look at all of the work this artist has put in. There's how many of these up here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 of them. And it's the same head each time. Looks like it's almost the same eyes. He changes colors and he's got different background. It's absolutely nuts. So that's what they're trying to do right now. Trying to sell these NFTs. So who's going to buy that? Who's going to pay $3,000 for artwork that, Hunter Biden could have done with a straw blowing ink around? Here's another one. This is from Ledger Insights. NBA's launching dynamic NFTs for fans. Baseball cards for the NBA that are basically just worthless. They're NFTs, non-fungible tokens. It has taken the crypto world by storm, and people are losing millions as you look. But it really is changing the e-commerce world. Stick around, we'll be right back. Bitcoin, blockchain, all of the rage. A lot of people are talking about it, but I gotta say, most people who are talking about it don't know much about it. And when it comes to anonymity, Bitcoin is probably the worst thing you could possibly do. It's amazing. There are a lot of misconceptions out there when it comes to technology, almost any kind of technology. And blockchain and Bitcoin are examples of a very misunderstood technology. Now, I'm not talking about how does it work? How are these ledgers maintained? How does this whole mining thing work? Why has China banned it? Why are a lot of countries going away from it? One country now, the dictator said, yeah, we're going to use Bitcoin as our official currency in addition to the US dollar. What's going on? It is complicated behind the scenes. It's complicated to use, although there are some entrepreneurs that have made some great strides there. I saw a documentary on what has been happening in that one country I mentioned, where they are able to pay in US dollars using Bitcoin. So they'll go up to a vendor on the street, quite literally. They'll have their smartphone with them. The vendor has their smartphone. They type in 15 cents for the taco and hit send. It goes to the other person, and they have 15 cents worth of Bitcoin. By the way, these types of microtransactions, with the way Bitcoin is structured behind the scenes, make things even less manageable in the Bitcoin world than they have been in the past. And that's why, in case you didn't know, Bitcoin is making some major changes here fairly soon. They've got to change the way all of this ledger stuff works because it takes too long to record and authorize transactions. And these ledgers just get way too long when it comes to all of these kind of microtransactions. So there's stuff going on. Bitcoin, there are many of these types of currencies out there. Ethereum's one. You've heard about Dogecoin because, of course, that's Elon Musk has been talking about, many others. And they're all different somewhat, but the main concepts are one of the big concepts. I'm going to pull an article up here on the screen for those watching on YouTube or also on Rumble. But this is an article from our friends at Wired Magazine. And I have subscribed to Wired for many years. This particular one is about what Wired is calling the crypto trap. Now, that's a very big deal. It is a trap, and it's a trap in a lot of different ways. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. Crypto is not what its name implies. A lot of people look at it and say, oh, crypto, that's cryptography. That's like the German Enigma machine in World War II and all of this new great crypto that we have nowadays. And there are some pretty amazing new cryptographic technologies that we've been using. But no, that's not what's really going on. You see, the basic premise behind all of these technologies is the concept of having a wallet. And this wallet has a unique identifier. It has a number assigned to it. So if I'm sending money to you, I'm going to have your wallet ID, your wallet number, and I'm going to now send you some amount, a fraction, most likely, of a cryptocurrency. Certainly if it's Bitcoin, it's almost certainly a fraction. So I'm going to send you $100 worth of, let's say, Bitcoin. What ends up happening now is these ledgers, which are public, are all going to record that Craig sent you $100 worth of Bitcoin. Of course, it's going to be in a fraction of a Bitcoin, so sometimes there's rounding errors. It's not going to be really exactly $100. Plus, there's the amazing amount of volatility in the cyber currencies. So even though I meant to send $100, it might end up being 110 if it goes up. It might be 90 if it goes down. You get that. You understand how that works. So the problem now is I have sent you $100 and public ledgers that anyone can gain access to. Now say wallet number 1234 sent $100 to wallet number 5678. Obviously the wallet number is a lot longer than that. So that's fine. And there's a degree of anonymity there. It's really called pseudo-anonymity. Because in reality, it's not completely anonymous because people know the transaction occurred and they know the wallet numbers, correct? It's like a bank account. If I put money into your bank account, that bank account number knows that the money came from a check that I wrote. Can you imagine that? Someone writing a check and that check, I had a number on it, a bank account number, right? So it can all be tracked. Well, much the same thing is true when it comes to cryptocurrencies. These cryptocurrencies are in public ledgers, and those public ledgers can be used with a little bit of work to figure out who you are. So this article here from our friends at Wired gets really hairy. And it might be of interest to you to read, but this is talking about a takedown that happened, and this is a massive takedown. This takedown was of a whole group of people who were involved in some really nasty stuff. In this particular case, what it was, Kitty, just a terrible thing, and the abuse surrounding it. So this article goes into not a lot of detail. I'm not going to read it because here on the air, because I don't want to upset too many people, because it's some of the details of this, even to think about them, are incredible. But the police broke into this middle-class suburb home in the outskirts of Atlanta, and there was Homeland Security. It was a guy from the IRS, and they came in, they took all of their electronic devices, they separated the family, putting the father, who is an assistant principal at the local high school, assistant principal. And he was the target of this investigation. So they had him in one room, they had his wife in another room, and they put the two kids into a third room. And they started questioning him. Now, this is part of a takedown of as I said, a whole ring of these people, including this assistant principal at a school. Can you believe that? So this IRS guy had flown in from Washington, D.C. to have a look over what was going on. But this agent from the IRS and his partner, his name was Janaskowski, I probably got that wrong, and Tigran Gambarian. And they had a small group of investigators, and they were at a whole bunch of different federal agencies, not just the IRS. But what once seemed to be untraceable was no longer untraceable. Now, I've talked on the show before about a lecture I went to by the Secret Service about how they had tracked down and shut down the world's largest website that was being used to sell illegal materials online. And it's fascinating what they did. But frankly, they're calling this particular bust a proof of concept, and that's why the IRS was in on this as well. But it was huge. So here's a quote from the IRS agent in this Wired magazine article. He's saying he remembers how the gravity of this whole thing. Let me pull this up on the screen, too, so you can read along here. But this was a high school administrator, a husband and a father of two. Whether he was guilty or innocent, the accusations this team of law enforcement agents were leveling against him, their mere presence in the home would almost certainly ruin his life. And he, as well as these other people, were counting on anonymity from Bitcoin. Now, obviously, I'm glad they got taken down. But listen, folks, if you think that it's safe, that it's anonymous, it ain't. Bitcoin just ain't there. CraigPeterson.com. Stick around. I've been blamed for really complaining about people not updating their software. And that includes things like firewalls. The FBI has stepped in, and they are going ahead and doing updates for you. So let's get into this, because this is, I think, something that should concern all of us. What should we be doing as a country? People are not updating their software. They're not updating their hardware, and particularly their hardware. Take a look at what's been happening with the firewalls and the firewall concerns. Everybody has some sort of firewall, well, almost everybody, but enough people that we can say everybody has a firewall. You get your internet from you name it. And because of the fact they're using something called NAT, network address translation, they've got some sort of firewall in front of you. So for instance, you've got your phone, right? You're using your phone and it's got internet on it. You're going through whoever your carrier is, and that carrier is giving you internet access, right? They don't have enough IP addresses, particularly IPv4, in order for you to get your very own unique little address out on the internet. No, they do when it comes to V6. Things are a little bit different. But your device is not completely exposed on the internet. Windows comes with a firewall. And by default, the Windows firewall is turned on. Now, this gets more than a little concerning, because that firewall that's turned on isn't really doing anything, because they've got a firewall turned on, and yet every service is accessible from outside, which is defeating the purpose of the firewall. Again, it's a complaint I've had about Microsoft now for decades, which is they have features that are just check boxes. Yes, it's got a firewall. Yeah, it's turned on. But the features don't work. So having a firewall and having everything open defeats the purpose of a firewall. Macs do not have a firewall turned on by default, but they do have their services disabled, which is just as effective, if not more effective. So one of the things we advise people to do is go into your Windows system, into the firewalls and your security settings, and turn off any services that you're not using. If you're not sharing file systems, then turn that off. In other words, like you're mounting the G drive or whatever you might call it from another computer, then you don't need it. If you're not a server for what's called SMB, then you don't need to share it. So turn off everything that you don't need. The worst that's going to happen is one of your programs isn't going to work right. And what you did last year, you're going to turn it back on. And you can do a lot of research online to find out what they are. We have over 200 settings that we change in Windows when we get a customer. Now, on the Mac side, you can turn it on. I like turning it on. I like turning off the ability to see my machine. So, in other words, the ability to be able to ping it. So I turn it on and I enable specific services. And again, you can do some research on that. I've got an Improving Windows Security course that people have taken, and we should probably do that again, if not just have some free webinars on how to do this so you guys can learn how to do it. But not that hard to do. Anyhow, bottom line is, people aren't updating their computers, even the Macs and Windows. We have a client that we just started, a new client, and we're tightening things up. And we've been finding Mac computers that are multiple major revisions behind. And that to me is shocking, because Apple Macs are just so easy to update. It is extremely rare that an Apple update will make your computer break, unlike in the Windows world where it's pretty common. So Windows guys, I kind of understand, but you're even more exposed. You're a bigger target. You need to keep up to date. So how about all of the other equipment that we have? I've had warnings again and again with you guys about what's happening with our smart devices that are out there, right? Our security cameras we have up in the corner, right? We have the smart thermostats people are using. The list goes on and on of all of this equipment that we're using that is exposing us, because when was the last time you updated it? How about the firmware in your router or your Wi-Fi, right? Some of the devices that I recommend to people, and if you have any questions, just email me, me@craigpeterson.com. I can give you recommendations, even if you're a home user, although my business obviously is working with businesses, on what kind of Wi-Fi to buy, what you should get, what you should do. I don't charge for any of that stuff, okay? You get it. But you have to ask me at craigpeterson.com. So you get this information and you go ahead and you buy whatever it is, but you don't keep it up to date, which is why I tend to only recommend stuff that automatically updates. But that also means every few years you're going to have to replace it, because unless you're using the good Cisco equipment where you can get a 7-year life out of it, you're not going to find that in consumer grade equipment. So what's happened here, I'm going to pull this up on my screen for people watching this on YouTube or on Rumble. But here is a thing that came straight out of our friends here from the FBI. This is from CISO. This is a magazine that I do follow. But they're talking about what they call Cyclops blink. So the article says, for the second time in a year, the FBI has used search and seizure warrants to clean malware from devices owned by private businesses and users without their explicit approval. The FBI used this approach to disrupt a botnet believed to be the creation of Russian government hackers. So they're calling this Cyclops Blink malware, discovered earlier this year. So here's the problem. What do you do? If you're the federal government, how do you try and keep your country safe? Now, we know we've got these military contractors. They make missiles that take out missiles, right? They provide defensive systems. You've heard of Iron Dome from years ago, all the way through all of the current stuff. That's what they do. But what do they do? What can they do when there's a botnet? A botnet is where there are multiple computers, in this case probably tens of thousands of computers located in the United States, that are acting like sleepers. They sit there and they wait for commands as to what they should do. Should they try and attack a machine? Should they try and spread more malware? What should they be doing? And these things are vicious. They are absolutely nasty. And in this case, we're looking at Russian malware. So Russia effectively, like the Americans, you might remember that TV show, it was a great show, but has computers that are owned by you and me and our businesses and government agencies that are under the control of the Russians. Now, you don't even know it. You're using your computer, you're playing games, you're going to Facebook, whatever it is you do on your computer, yet your computer is under command and control of the Russians. So the FBI goes to a court and says, hey, we've got to go ahead and shut this down. We need a warrant. They get the warrant, and the search and seizure warrant lets them now get onto these machines that are part of the botnet or the controlling machines for the botnet and either remove the malware or go ahead and take control of the botnet themselves so it can't be used. And by the way, our friends at Microsoft, they've gotten involved in this too, which is really, frankly, cool in shutting down some of these botnets. Hey, I want to encourage everybody, take a couple of minutes, go to craigpeterson.com/subscribe. That's Craig Peterson, CraigPeterson, and subscribe. And I'll be sending you a special report on passwords plus 2 more. I send out the most popular special reports that anybody has ever asked for. Hey, I've got a little bit more to discuss on what's happening with Russia and Microsoft and more. But I'm also going to talk about QR codes. There is a great explanation that's in your newsletter from Monday about why you shouldn't trust them. Let's finish up this Russian thing, and then we're going to get into why you cannot trust QR codes and a brand new way the bad guys are using QR codes to really mess with us. Now, if you're watching over on either YouTube or on Rumble, you'll see this. Let me pull up my screen for you. But here we go. So this is very interesting. In the last segment, we talked a little bit about what our friends over at the FBI have been doing, which is they have been removing malware from people's computers because people haven't been keeping their computers up to date, right? Part of the botnets that we explained. Well, The FBI isn't the only one out there trying to stop these Russians and the hackers. Anonymous has been very big at it. In fact, let me pull up this other article. This is from Security Affairs, and here we go. And it's talking about this whole army of these anonymous hackers. Now, anonymous have been a nightmare for many businesses that they didn't like. Right, Anonymous will go ahead and they'll do usually pretty basic stuff. They'll do denial of service attacks, some other things. So they don't like you because they don't like the "Don't Say Gay" bill in Florida. And without bothering to do any research, they'll just start attacking organizations that support it or organizations that don't support it, depending on how they want to do it. So this is an interesting article here because it's talking about these various websites that they've hacked. Now, some of them are government sites and some of them are private industries. Now, one of the cool things, bad things about hacking private industry and releasing the emails is now the competitors to these businesses know what they're doing. And in some cases, there's proprietary technology that's being released. Now, when it comes to Russian proprietary technology, the Western world doesn't care a whole lot about some of it. But here's some examples of what these hacktivists have got at. This is a company called Forest. 37,000 emails stolen from the company, Russian logging and wood manufacturing firm. Again, it would give you a little bit of an idea into the whole Russian, what are they doing in the forest industry. This one, I think, is a little more concerning for the Russians. Aerogas. This is an engineering company that focuses in the oil and gas industry. Their clients include a whole bunch of Russian companies. They've leaked approximately 100,000 emails from Aerogas. That is a huge deal because so much of the country's revenue, the number one industry in Russia, is oil and gas. Petrofort, one of the largest office space and business centers in St. Petersburg, the hackers have leaked approximately 300,000 emails from Petrofort. Again, you can use that to find out what's happening in their economy. What are they doing? How are businesses doing? Are they going to go under? So you can see some tweets here. I've got them up on my screen on YouTube and Rumble. Anonymous, what they're saying that they've done. And you can follow Anonymous directly on Twitter. Particularly fond of them. They've done a lot of things that I disagree with. But this is really telling us about a whole new approach to warfare. Right? Back in the day, you and I couldn't get involved. We could potentially take up arms and go and fight, right? Think about the Spanish-American War. Think about what's happening now in Ukraine, where Americans have just gone over there and taken up firearms in order to help to defend Ukraine. People who are maybe of Ukrainian descent, maybe not, right? But we have never seen this type of involvement by average citizens because Anonymous is not like some big fancy company or government agency. Anonymous is a bunch of people who are trying to be anonymous and do something. So they stole 145 gigabytes. Look at this. It's just crazy. So here's the anonymous Twitter thread itself, right? Talking about what it's absolutely incredible. So that's what Anonymous is up to. They are hacking Russia, and they're hacking Russia in a big way. Now, next up, we have our friends at Microsoft. Microsoft has been seizing Russian domains that they are accusing of having been linked to these Russian hackers that have been going after think tanks and government agencies in the U.S. and the EU, I should say, which I'm sure includes the UK, because the UK's gotten involved. So this article from The Verge is talking about how Microsoft has seized 7 domains belonging to Fancy Bear, APT28, which is, we've seen them active in a number of companies here, right in the Northeast, United States. These companies who are trying to provide materials, software, hardware for government contracts, right? So they're not even direct government contractors for the feds. They are just subcontractors. And we've seen Fancy Bear in there. We've seen the Chinese in these companies. It's incredible. And they have no idea that all of their intellectual property is being stolen, which is why the federal government has started cracking down on contractors and subcontractors. And this whole paragraph 7012 thing, we're getting geeky here, but companies that have to protect even unclassified information, confidential unclassified, and they haven't been. So Microsoft obtained a court order. You can see this on my screen over at YouTube and at Rumble, to take control of each domain on April 6th, that then started redirecting them to a sinkhole. So what they do is they take control of the DNS for the domain. So the root name servers now point to a Microsoft name server and then send them to a sinkhole. A sinkhole is basically nowhere. You go there, there's nothing on the site, right? Or in this case, also servers used by cybersecurity experts to capture and analyze malicious connections. And they'll do that oftentimes when we're talking about these botnets, like we talked about a little earlier today. So apparently they're trying to establish long-term access to the systems of the targets. What did we just talk about? Long-term access? Botnets, right? That's what botnets are. So Microsoft has gotten involved. They've been doing this now for a little while. It's obviously not their normal business model, but it is something that they've been doing. They were also, by the way, the Fancy Bear linked to the cyber attacks on the DNC in 2016, and they also targeted the U.S. election in 2020, which is why, part of the reason why, anyways, don't use electronic equipment for our elections. Have paper ballots, have people count those ballots. Yeah, it takes longer. You can't have the instant thing on TV, which is why all of these news services say, oh, don't do that. That's ridiculous. But it's the only thing we can guarantee that these guys, like I got it up on the screen again, Fancy Bear, the Chinese, etc. It's the only way they can't get in. And if we were doing paper ballots and we had bipartisan people counting the ballots and independents counting the ballots, observing this, we wouldn't have all of these problems that we had with the last election where people were saying it was stolen, it was hacked. How do we know it was stolen? How do we know it wasn't stolen? Go back to paper ballots, get rid of the scanning machines, and particularly get rid of these electronic voting machines where you touch the screen to cast your vote. Those things are ridiculous. What if there's a software bug in it? How can you go back and change the vote? People have complained about it again. Wait a minute, I voted for this guy, and yet it recorded my vote for the other guy. It's ridiculous. Anyways, back to QR codes, okay? I'm going to pull this up on the screen because I think this is a cool article here. This is from actually a site over in India. It's called scroll.in. And they're talking in here about how hazardous it can be to use QR codes. Now, they're not saying don't use QR codes. We've all had to use them. I've got up on my screen this picture of being at a table and you scan the QR code in order to get the menu, in order to order. I did that. I was in Vermont and we were riding motorcycles, a buddy and I, going to the little tiny restaurant, small restaurant, and it had half a dozen tables, and they didn't have menus. You scanned it, the QR code that was there on the table, and you placed your order and off it goes. A lot of places they've been doing that with menus. You've seen that more and more. Saves them money as well and lets them change their prices more frequently. Yeah, thanks for that. Inflation, guys. But why shouldn't you use these QR codes? Why should you be extra careful? Here's the answer. QR codes are the URL of a web page. That's the bottom line. Would you click a random URL that came in an email? Would you click on a random URL in an ad or on a web page? We certainly know better than to click URLs in our emails. But that's exactly what the QR code is. And on top of it, the URL in a QR code tends to be what we call a shortened URL. So it might be bit.ly, so it might be bit.ly/ and then some random characters. How do you know where it's going to take you? You don't. All you know is it's going to take you to Bitly, but that Bitly URL could be sending you to a malicious site, and now your phone could be hacked. It could be using your phone for Bitcoin mining, for who knows what. So be very careful. And the bad guys are using these in a different way that you might not have seen before, which is they are embedding QR code graphics into emails. And they're thinking that people are going to hold up their phone to the email, and what are they going to do? They're going to scan the QR code that was in their email, and now they're in trouble. Yeah, that simple. Hey, visit me online, craigpeterson.com. Make sure you sign up for my newsletter, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. Of course, Craig Peterson, SON.com. And I'm going to send you my top 3 special reports, absolutely free. We got to take care of these bad guys.